easiest to open, otherwise it's
Wrapped in fact,
The fight with it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a delight and a pleasure to be here today. I had not met Sumita till this afternoon. She was gracious enough to call me to be here and was good enough to send me a copy of this book in advance. Why I say it's a delight is because ordinarily in a book release function of this kind, there is no scope for a keynote address. I don't propose to bore you with a keynote address because basically it's the event and this is the day of the author, and I think you have all assembled here today to hear the author in conversation with a far more experienced and widespread, better read author too. However, permit me just 3 minutes, since I have a captive audience and since Sumita has requested me to be here today. I came across this book and I read Sumita's first book also. And after seeing this book, I find that she is not the regular or run-of-the-mill bureaucrat or diplomat who gets a posting to a foreign nation, spends time over there, meets with the people, attends cocktail events, conducts delegations, and of course sees around the country, comes back. Sumita seems to have imbibed a lot. And the better thing about having imbibed those things is that she's willing to share it with you and me. It's a remarkable book, very insightful, very incisive, the kind of perception that she has sown about, even this age. Sumita, you are 1991 batch?
Yes.
That's it. So, which means how much? 15 plus 9, 24 years of service only, isn't it? As compared to some people with 40, and there are senior bureaucrats than me sitting here who've got probably 50 years behind them. But the kind of, a perception that she has shown in looking into issues. China is an enigma in a large number of ways to all of us. Most of us have been China watchers in our own way. But how China has turned around 10 crore investment, employing 15 people, 20 people, what does she say? It turned out to be a factory spread over a sprawling area, workshed in cement roads. Trucks lumber to the back of the complex, laden with fresh vegetables for offloading. The Laoguan, I don't know how it's pronounced, pickle factory turned out to be a private enterprise set up on land leased from the village with a bank loan. The factory purchased 200 tons of vegetables every day from the local farmers. The enterprise employed 3,000 persons, and she calls it a micro-enterprise. This is the Chinese, on the Chinese scale, it would certainly be a micro-enterprise. Workers every day for offloading vegetables from the vans, preparing pickles, packing them, and so on. And this is the way China has made itself. Now, yet another fantastic thing about Shanghai, the bun. All of us have seen it. Why can't we make the Yamuna as beautiful as the bun is? There's no reason why we can't do it. Certainly not lack of resources, because I think it's unfair to say the former CAG knows that about 600 crores is already spent on beautifying the Yamuna in the Delhi area itself, and you know how beautiful it is. When I was a student in Delhi University, we used to go river rafting the Yamuna, let alone do rafting over there, let alone the polluted waters. There is no water in the Yamuna today. Forget rafting. And we've already spent about 1,600 crores. And the bund, as she narrates in the book, on the one side, the Victorian style buildings, Italian, German, French, obviously British also, and which have been transformed and is being run by financial institutions. On the other side, modern buildings, steel and glass, skyscrapers created by the Chinese administration. And it's a beautiful place where you go and spend the evening with your family, huge amounts of clean water.
And frankly, you touched a lot now with me by talking about the Jamna, because I spent my early childhood in Delhi, at least every summer vacation, and I do remember, yes, there was water, and there was a pontoon bridge, which is not even built now, and we all went to pontoon bridge.
And that water was clean also.
Yes, it was much cleaner than this, yes. Right now, in fact, I have a solution to the Jamna problem in Delhi. We are building so many bridges and spending all this money on cleaning up the Jamna. If it's a bureaucratic solution, we should just denotify it as a river. And then builders and all will come and they'll fill it up, and in any case, we can just walk across it. So what you say is right, and that's, I think that cuts immediately into the theme of the book. The Bund was built a long time back, and then Bund is ever possible in India, except the state of Gujarat, which in some ways is governed by different principles, because they've been able to do that with Sabarmati in Gujarat. Is such a thing possible? And have you seen the Chinese use methods to do these things that you know, one, will never be used in India, impossible, and second, could be learned in India?
The Bund, which has come up for discussion right in the beginning, was one of the most fascinating experiences of my time in China. Like it has been described already by Mr. Rai. You have the colonial buildings at the back, and in between is the Huangpu River. On the other side is this ultra-modern collection of cosmopolitan buildings, steel, glass, skyscrapers, the financial center, the training center, everything in that conglomerate, built in just 20 years. The story goes that Deng Xiaoping, when he had visited Shanghai in 1990, there was a feeling in Shanghai that the city and the province has been left behind in the reforms. The reforms, as you know, started post-1978, and the 1990s is when they were really spreading all across the country. And that time, he stood there on the Bund with the colonial buildings behind him, stretched his hand across the to the other side, across the river, and there was no just agricultural marshy lands, and he said this should be developed into a modern financial center. Within 20 years, it happened. The question is whether we can do it in India. I've written this book with the hope that whatever China has done, we can do better. And I have every faith in this statement of mine. In fact, my dad asked me yesterday, very cynically, do you think we can do any of this? We are a democracy. And I think we can do it better because we are a democracy. If we have a participative, decentralized, honest approach, if we have our plans in place, the strategy, which all seems so clear with the China experience behind us, and we just go at it. So I do have faith in that. Amravati is one example. That's my cadre. And with the inspirational leadership of Mr. Naidu, I'm sure you'll find something like that in Amravati very soon.
So thank you very much, because when one good thing gets done, others get done. In fact, if I may say so, China, since economic reform began, has been very useful to India. Because anytime Indian system wavers, you show them what's happening in China and they get scared. And one of my favorite stories of all times, many of us learn our politics from old-fashioned Indian politicians, and one of them used to be Mr. Sitaram Kesri. I know everybody laughs when I mention his name, but he was one of the wisest politicians you've met, and a great tutor. So he once led a parliamentary delegation to China, I think before you went there. And when he came back, we dropped by one evening to chat with him. I think late SP Singh, I think Harish Khare was also there. And we asked him, Chacha, China mein kya dekha? And he said, ये जो चीन के कम्युनिस्ट है ना, ये DTC के बस ड्राइवर की तरह है। तो हमने कहा क्या मतलब? तो he said, वो सिग्नल लेफ्ट करते हैं, मुड़ते हैं राइट। So will India change like that? And can China continue to be like that? Because in China also our questions are beginning to get raised, particularly with the rise of internet there. They may have controlled internet, but they have internet, they have bloggers. They can no longer now come and remove villages as they used to do in the past?
China is supposed to be communist, but like rightly pointed out by Mr. Gupta, there is so much of capitalism there, and I do see it as a very constructive form of capitalism. In fact, we also had a group of 10 legislators from Kerala visit China, and it was my job to take them around the country for almost 10 days. And they belonged to 3 different parties. The ones who belonged to the Communist Party were very upset because they thought this is not communism.
In domestic demand, I think maybe as a percentage of overall economy, domestic demand is not as high as in India because India's exports are very poor. Somehow it doesn't sound convincing.
No, you're very right. In fact, the September...
Unless the Chinese view is that you guys don't even export so much, why are you totally collapsing? How can you even get 6 or 7%?
Yeah, I think that's the point, that we are not exporting so much, and it's the domestic demand which has propelled the economy. Even the 2008 crisis did not hit us so badly because we were not export dependent. And in China, you're right, the domestic demand is picking up. And today the bright spots in the Chinese economy, if you see the latest data, is the retail, the consumer spending, and they say the future of China lies not in the export sector but with the consumers. And secondly, the services are picking up. So if the industrial manufacturing decline in profits is there in China, the services are making up. Well, that's what the data shows.
Well, now at some point soon, audience has to come in, but it's a question that I'm asked many times now by Indian corporates. The people most opposed to genuine economic reform are Indian corporates because they think जिसका जितना बन गया उसको लेके रहते हैं, why allow more competition to come in, right? And they say, see what are we doing? We are aping the West. Look at the Chinese. They did not allow Facebook, Twitter, anybody to come in, and they've got their own now. And each one of their brands has now multi-tens of billions of dollars of valuation. All that valuation, all that wealth, India has moved to Facebook and Twitter, and our Prime Minister instead goes to Facebook headquarters in California. So why didn't we also shut off everything and let our own new economy to develop? What is your view?
China has used a very clever way to develop. And it's not at the cost of their local manufacturers. They have promoted local champions while inviting foreign investment. As foreign investment comes in, it's likely to be more successful if they have joint ventures with the local manufacturers. The local manufacturers absorb the technologies and they also absorb the managerial technologies. Sometimes there are policies like indigenous innovation which favors the local manufacturers at the cost of the MNCs. There are also sometimes subsidies and many times access to subsidized credit from state-owned banks. There are certain unfair advantages, and though they have invited foreign investment, it's not been at the cost of their encouraging the local manufacturers. Secondly, shutting down the internet, Google, we used to have a lot of problems there in China. I don't think that's the solution, and I don't think that has contributed really to...
No, but on the other hand, the Chinese have got Alibaba.
Alibaba, they do.
Whereas Alibaba, they do their own brands, they have got a lot. But in India now, all the Flipkart is today bigger than Amazon. But we don't know what will happen going ahead.
I think that's a very relevant point, and Alibaba is one of the most powerful success stories ever anywhere. The IPO of Alibaba last year was a world record, and it also brought a lot of profits to Yahoo, who chose to sell their shares of Alibaba at that point in time. That apart, Alibaba has done, eBay, Amazon couldn't succeed in China, and Alibaba has been able to create a digital marketplace which Amazon, eBay, they all have access to the Indian market with Flipkart, Snapdeal. That is because Alibaba was able to, it understood the Chinese mentality, the Chinese market. The number one thing they did was they promoted consumer to consumer contact. While Amazon was spending a lot of money on advertising through the net, Alibaba knew the farmers, most of the farmers in the rural areas don't browse the internet. So they started advertising on buses, on hoardings, and they were able to attract the rural Chinese consumer as well as the producer. And of course, the local language, very few people are second, third generation English speakers in China. The local language has really encouraged internet, social media. In India too, in the rural areas, we don't see the youngsters really getting onto the social media, Twitter, Facebook, the way we would want them to, and the way they do in China.
Everybody's on WhatsApp, that I can tell you. It's called WhatsApp, but everybody is on it. But you know what you're saying is right, because profits of Alibaba, that SoftBank is now used to fund so many of the Indian startups, from Flipkart to Snapdeal to Ola to, in fact, all of them in Mobi. Sir, would you like to ask a question?
No, certainly not. I think
Questions from the audience, please raise your hand in the back first.
See whether the infrastructure will pay for itself or not. As the Chinese investment into infrastructure is actually paying for itself. You hear of highways where there are hardly any cars moving on them. Or you hear of bullet trains which are practically half empty. So how is it able to get a return on investment on all these investments?
It's a very supply-driven model. The Chinese economic
But
model.
if it was a supply-driven model, then in that case, I intervene. If it was that kind of a model, then somewhere the economics would have come in. But given the fact that so much investment with very little return, most of the people talk about hardly any returns on the investments made in infrastructure. Of course, there will be investment returns which will be some.
You know, the fast train which goes between Beijing and Shanghai, there are 60 fast trains which are going between these two cities at any point in time, because every 15 minutes there's a fast train which leaves from Beijing to Shanghai. It has encouraged a lot of ancillary industry. It has led to a lot of labor mobility. It has helped the foreign investors get deeper into China, particularly the western provinces which are lagging behind in development, where there's a lot of opportunity now to develop. It has also led to a lot of incomes for the people who worked on this infrastructure. China has 60% of the high-speed network in the world, is 16,000 kilometers. So with that kind of intervention, yes, it's a supply-driven model. It has its underside. It's the same story for the expressways. It's the same story with real estate. You have ghost cities. At the same time, it has propelled employment, growth, incomes. It's a supply-driven system. I'm not defending it. And I have discussed it in the book. It does have its underside. But today, Chinese will not die of hunger.
So
There is no malnourishment the way we see it in other emerging economies.
there's
Catch her outside.
Can I ask, it's a two-part question. Are you fluent in written and spoken Chinese? And the reason I ask is, if you are, were you able to talk to the ordinary Chinese, how they see India, given that China claims Arunachal
Money. And you can return it to us later. How the nations feel about returning that money is another story. Similarly, the BRICS Development Bank. So economically, it's very fascinating and very important for us to be aware of how China is expanding geopolitically through economic corridors, through purchase of corporates or natural resource, the mines and the oil, the gas fields are being purchased, the ports are being purchased. It's very important for us to understand that from an economic point of view.
So would you like to say something?
Yeah, a question that you also raised.
They come and manufacture here, not only do we get the employment, the jobs, the households get benefit, but there's no credibility to this sensitive equipment which is being used by India. There are multiple such examples where the trade deficit is high and we should be getting Chinese investments into India. This is my personal view.
Well,
Question in the back.
Of economic unrest, if they are not able to ensure minimum incomes, minimum standard of living. And also surprisingly, I found them, I don't know if I can use the word, very democratic, very open in discussing their own problems. But yes, I understand what you're talking about. There is unrest, but again it comes from environmental issues, from the farmer not being given property rights over his land, the land being taken away by corporates which create environmental degradation, the toxicity in the soil, in the water. That's where the unrest is coming from, rather than from a lack of democracy. That's how I felt. So the foreign investment was leveraged in a very beneficial way by the economy, by the Chinese economy. More to the Chinese GDP, and the per capita incomes are much higher. We all know the eastern provinces developed first due to certain reasons. They were encouraged, and the line which was used by Deng Xiaoping was, let a few get rich first. So you encourage some provinces, some people to get rich first. Those people could be doing capitalist things. Those provinces could be doing a supply-driven growth model, but you let certain provinces, certain people get rich first. Now they're concentrating on the areas which were left behind, and they see a great potential there, like I just mentioned. Those are the areas where they are developing infrastructure, the areas where they are connecting, building the roads, economic corridors into Central Asia, connecting them more with markets. Like this, the eastern provinces are connected through sea routes to the rest of the world. They want to connect the western provinces through economic corridors to Europe. Actually, I'm sure you would be aware, there is a train which goes from Chongqing to Dusseldorf in Germany.
And they
From
want to
Chongqing in
you
China.
mean that they want to take one to the US also.
Yes, they want to take one to the US, through Serbia, under the Pacific Ocean, through Alaska, Canada, and to US. Don't be crestfallen. There are English-speaking abilities. They always want to know how we are able to speak such good English, well, those of us in the urban areas. And these are the things which they're trying to learn. A lot of our Indian companies IT companies are working in China today. And they're trying to take their help to train their own people in IT.
But that's half the difference.
We don't have time, we have to close it now, but I will only close it with a tiny story. Our problem is not democracy. Japan has done very well with democracy, right? They've grown very well with democracy. Our problem is something else. Our problem is that we have a weakness for mantras. In 1988, when opening up of the communist world at first started, I used to work for India Today magazine. I was sent to do a story on why India's left wasn't changing. And I went to see communist leaders in Kolkata, and I do remember meeting Mr. Saroj Mukherjee, who headed the party then in West Bengal, and he was sitting under portraits of Lenin and Stalin and Marx. And he said to me, I said, but you know, Gorbachev is changing, Deng is changing, why are you not changing? He said, my communism is purer than that of Deng Xiaoping and Gorbachev. So I think we tend to absorb mantras too fast, and I think it's a session. It's a session by itself, and maybe a smart writer should do a book on this. That how can we absorb the worst of other people's ideology? Thank you very much. Big hand to us.